They say books are humanity's safest treasures. Words bound in leather, ink pressed onto paper, carrying voices across centuries. We cradle them as guardians of memory, of wisdom, of truth. But what if a book was not a gift, but a curse? What if every page turned was a step closer to the grave? Imagine a scholar in a cold monastery cell, candles flickering, his trembling fingers running across brittle parchment. He bends low, inhaling the faint perfume of aged ink, unaware that what clings to his skin is not merely history. It is death. Days later, his hands swell, his lips darken, his lungs struggle for air. He does not suspect that the very book he cherished has begun to kill him. And when he dies, others step forward, eager to read, to learn, to touch, and they too wither. This is no fable whispered to frighten children. This is a true shadow cast upon the history of knowledge. A book that killed, slowly and silently, leaving behind a trail of scholars and collectors who paid for their curiosity with their lives. It had no knife hidden in its spine, no trap concealed in its cover. Its weapon was far more insidious. The ink, the very pigment, poison disguised as wisdom. And so, the pages that promised enlightenment carried the scent of a tomb. Libraries feared it. Priests called it cursed. Physicians could not explain it. And yet, people kept turning its pages because to humans, knowledge has always been irresistible, even when it devours us. Tonight, we open that book together. We walk alongside its victims. We breathe the dust they breathed. We feel the fever that burned through them. And we trace the mystery of how something as fragile as parchment became a tool of murder. This is the story of the poisoned book. A story where curiosity is not only dangerous, it is fatal. If history's darkest secrets stir something within you, if you find beauty not just in triumph but in tragedy, then you belong here. Subscribe now, and let us journey into the silence where the dead still whisper through ink and paper. The first man who touched it never knew he had doomed himself. He was a scholar, thin from years of study, eyes hollow from long nights spent in candlelight. The year was uncertain, but the setting was unmistakable. A cold chamber of stone, a monastery's archive where silence hung heavy as incense. He believed he had discovered a relic, a text that could unlock knowledge hidden for generations. His fingers, calloused from ink and quill, traced the faded lettering on the spine. To him, it was not danger, it was salvation. He opened the book. The pages cracked softly, brittle and yellow, releasing a faint cloud of dust that shimmered in the candlelight. He inhaled, as readers always do, seeking that familiar scent of age and wisdom. But this breath was different. Invisible particles clung to his skin, slid beneath his fingernails, settled on his lips. Poison masquerading as parchment, death disguised as knowledge. The sickness began quietly, a dry throat, a mild fever, nothing that would have alarmed a man accustomed to cold winters and poor food. But soon his skin erupted in sores. His lips blackened. His mind grew confused, as if thoughts themselves were rotting away. Within days, he could no longer stand. His colleagues whispered of plague, of demons, of divine punishment. No one suspected the book, resting quietly on his desk, its pages waiting for the next hand, the next breath, the next victim. And there was another, a young apprentice, eager to prove himself, stepped forward when the master grew ill. He believed knowledge would protect him. He believed the relic was holy, chosen. He pressed his palms against the cover, unknowing that the same toxin that had seeped into his teacher's blood now claimed his own. His death was swifter, more violent, as if the poison had grown impatient. Villagers remembered his screams, hoarse, ragged, pleading for water that could never quench the fire consuming him from within. Word began to spread, but slowly. Death in those days was common, a daily visitor in households and monasteries alike. Few connected the bodies piling up with the fragile book left behind. Some avoided it out of superstition. Others, bolder, opened it still, believing their faith would shield them. It did not. Imagine the terror of those final moments. The skin burning as though from within, the breath short and frantic, the the body trembling against invisible chains. To the dying, it must have felt as if the book itself was alive, as if its words were not meant to be read by human eyes. A forbidden text, whispering not wisdom, but ruin. And so, the legend of the poisoned book was born, not through rumor or prophecy, but through the silent, agonizing deaths of those who dared to turn its pages. To understand the terror of this book, we must enter the mind of its maker. For a poisoned book does not happen by accident. It is crafted, deliberately, with the patience of a scribe and the precision of an executioner. In those centuries, knowledge was not harmless ink on paper. The very colors that illuminated manuscripts were drawn from minerals and plants, substances both beautiful and deadly. Green pigments often came from copper arsenite, a powder so toxic that it could seep into the skin, blistering the flesh of artists who handled it. Some reds were born from cinnabar, laced with mercury that gnawed at the mind until madness set in. Even the gold that gleamed across sacred texts was bound with solutions that burned if touched too long. To a skilled hand, a book could become a weapon, its every letter sharpened like a blade. Imagine a scribe, perhaps hired, perhaps compelled, grinding minerals in a dim chamber. He mixes arsenic into the ink, the dust rising like ghostly smoke, coating his lungs as he works. He dips his quill, steadying his hand, and lays down words that will not merely be read, but breathed. Was he an assassin cloaked as an artist? A servant ordered by his master to create a silent execution? Or was it done for faith, to keep unworthy eyes from seeing what lay hidden within? Historians cannot say with certainty. What remains clear is that the poison was there by design, woven into the very veins of the parchment. The brilliance of such a weapon lay in its subtlety. A sword leaves blood, a dagger screams treachery, but a poisoned book carries no trace. The victim dies days later, far removed from the act of reading. No one suspects the innocent object resting quietly on the shelf. To touch it is to sign one's own death warrant without ever knowing. And so the book became more than parchment and pigment. It was a trap set for the curious, a snare for the ambitious. Those who sought its knowledge paid not only with their health, but with their very breath. Some believed it was cursed, as if demons had whispered into the ink. Others, more rational, suspected deliberate malice. But whether born of faith or politics, greed or vengeance, the craft remained the same. Every stroke of the pen infused with poison, every page a silent pact between author and death. The irony is cruel. A book, meant to preserve life's wisdom, instead devoured life itself. And as it passed from hand to hand, kingdom to kingdom, no one could resist opening it. That was its genius. That was its horror. The cruelty of the poisoned book revealed itself not in an instant, but in slow, merciless waves. Its victims rarely dropped dead upon turning the page. No, death was patient, unfolding like a play in acts, each more gruesome than the last. The first sign was deceptively small. A headache, a cough, a dryness in the throat. In an age where illness stalked every home, no one questioned it. They prayed, they drank bitter herbs, they whispered psalms. But within days, the symptoms deepened. Skin turned pale, then blotched with angry sores that wept and cracked. Fingers stiffened as though touched by frost, lips split and darkened. The poison crept inward, rotting not flesh alone but thought itself. Victims forgot words they had spoken only moments before. Some laughed without reason, others wept without control. Madness was often the cruelest stage. Imagine a scholar, once eloquent, reduced to a stammering shadow, scratching at his own skin until blood stained his robes. Imagine the apprentice gasping through nights of fever, clutching at his chest as though unseen hands squeezed the breath from his lungs. Families looked on helplessly. Physicians arrived with their leeches and poultices, muttering of humors and spirits, but their cures brought no relief. The sickness mocked them, advancing silently, invisible yet undeniable. Rumors spread through the halls of monasteries and courts. Some whispered that the victims had read forbidden words, secrets not meant for human eyes, and that God himself had struck them down. Others insisted it was witchcraft, a curse etched in ink by hands that served darker masters. But in every tale, one truth lingered. The deaths followed the book. Wherever it traveled, so too did the sickness. Perhaps the most haunting were the final hours. Victims often lingered in agony, bodies racked with tremors, eyes clouded by a film of sickness. Some begged for water though their bellies were already swollen. Others spoke to figures no one else could see, whispering names of ancestors long buried. And when death finally claimed them, their faces bore the twisted mask of both fear and awe, as though they had glimpsed something beyond the veil. And yet, the book remained untouched, unharmed, unstained. Its pages lay still, its words intact, waiting patiently for the next curious soul. The tragedy was not only in the suffering it caused, but in the silence that followed. For every victim believed they were alone, that their death was unique. None lived long enough to connect the pattern. None realized that the book itself was the executioner. And so the suffering unfolded in secret, written not in ink but in blood and bone, a hidden chapter of history too terrifying to be forgotten, yet too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Whispers travel faster than soldiers, faster than caravans, faster than the wind. And soon, the tale of the cursed book began to seep beyond the monastery walls, bleeding into villages, towns, and kingdoms. It carried with it both terror and fascination. A simple object, bound in leather, lined with ink, now bore a reputation darker than any weapon of steel. In the courts of Europe, men of learning debated its nature. Some swore it was sorcery, a relic forged in the crucible of witchcraft, meant to punish the curious. Priests warned from their pulpits that it was divine retribution, a reminder that not all knowledge was meant for mortal hands. To open its pages was to invite the wrath of heaven. Yet for others, those very whispers ignited hunger. Kings and nobles, driven by pride, longed to possess it, not out of fear but desire. For what treasure could be more alluring than a book so dangerous that men would die for it? Merchants spoke of it as though it were a ghost. They claimed the book moved on its own, vanishing from libraries only to resurface miles away. A chest once sealed was found opened, the cursed object lying atop the rest of the cargo like a serpent waiting to strike. No guard admitted to touching it. No thief confessed to stealing it. And so, the legend grew, transforming the book into something more than parchment. It became an omen. But kingdoms do not thrive on superstition alone. Behind closed doors, rulers saw opportunity. Imagine the possibilities of a weapon that required no blade, no poison slipped into a cup, no dagger in the dark. Imagine a rival scholar silenced, a dangerous critic erased, an enemy weakened without the hand of the assassin ever revealed. A poisoned book could serve as the perfect tool of power, disguised as a gift, an offering, a relic of wisdom, while in truth it was a death sentence written in ink. Fear spread among the people, yet fascination lingered in the hearts of the powerful. For even as peasants whispered prayers and avoided the libraries where the book was rumored to rest, courtiers and monarchs schemed. Was it truly cursed? Or was it simply misunderstood? A dangerous object waiting for the right hands to wield it? And so, the poisoned book became something greater than its victims. It became a story of kingdoms, a tale of power, greed, and silence. A relic that crossed borders not as knowledge, but as a shadow. But every shadow, once cast long enough, grows into a legend. And in this legend, fear was not the only companion. The hunger for control was stronger still. The poisoned book was no longer a mere object of fear. It became a tool of intrigue. In the gilded halls of palaces, where secrets whispered louder than trumpets, the book's legend took on a new life. To rulers, it was not simply a cursed relic. It was a weapon, one that could pass invisibly from hand to hand, striking at rivals with the soft rustle of parchment rather than the clang of steel. Imagine a courtier, ambitious and hungry, presenting the book to his king as a token of loyalty. Bound in leather, decorated with gilded edges, it seemed a treasure worthy of royalty. The king accepts it, delighted by its beauty, never realizing that in weeks his body would betray him. His lips darkening, his breath shortening, his court descending into chaos. To the outside world, his death would look natural, a fever or plague. But those who knew of the book's true nature would understand. It had spoken again. Such power did not remain unnoticed. Some rulers kept it hidden in vaults, not daring to destroy it, yet unwilling to part with it. To them, it was a symbol of dominion, proof that knowledge itself could serve as executioner. Others sought to use it directly, sending it as a gift across borders, a silent ambassador of death. Wrapped in silk, carried with reverence, it crossed kingdoms like an assassin cloaked in parchment. And yet, for all its reputation, the book was shrouded in silence. Those who suspected its nature rarely dared speak of it aloud. For what accusation could one make? Who would believe that letters and ink could kill? To claim such a thing was to risk being called mad or worse, accused of heresy. And so the poisoned book thrived in secrecy, protected not by locks and chains, but by the silence of those who feared it. This silence was its greatest shield. A dagger can be defended against, an army can be seen approaching, but a book? Who would guard themselves from words on a page? Knowledge was sacred, and to suggest otherwise was to challenge the very foundation of learning and faith. Thus, the book sat quietly on shelves and altars, waiting, its silence as deadly as its poison. Power and silence walked hand in hand, and the book embodied both. It was never just a manuscript. It was a mirror of humanity's hunger, for control, for knowledge, for dominance over life and death. And so long as men desired those things, the poisoned book would endure. Every relic that carries fear eventually disappears, not because it is forgotten, but because it is hidden. So it was with the poisoned book. Its legend grew too heavy, its reputation too dark, until no one dared to leave it resting in plain sight. One day it was present in the archives of a nobleman's library, whispered about by servants who swore their master was falling ill. And then, as if swallowed by the earth, it was gone. Some said it was stolen, that a desperate thief, ignorant of its power, snatched it for gold, only to die in agony days later. The book left abandoned on a road like carrion no one dared touch. Others whispered that priests intervened, that it was seized by holy men who recognized it as a tool of the devil, and that it was buried in sanctified soil, chained in iron, never to be opened again. And still others believed it passed quietly into another kingdom, wrapped as a gift in velvet and ribbon, its true nature known only to those who smiled as they sent it across borders. But there is a darker possibility, that the book was deliberately concealed not to protect humanity, but to preserve its power. Kings had vaults that even their heirs never saw, chambers beneath cathedrals where the light of the sun never touched. What better resting place for a cursed object than in the bowels of stone, where silence and shadow could guard it until the world was ready to use it again? Centuries passed, and yet the whispers never fully died. A peasant in one country spoke of a book locked in a chest that killed every man who dared to read it. A sailor swore he saw monks carrying a heavy volume to a monastery on a cliffside, their faces pale as though bearing a corpse. In another kingdom, a nobleman's unexplained death was followed by rumors that he had received a manuscript of rare beauty from an unknown benefactor. The book became a ghost story, half believed, half feared, but always remembered. Its vanishing did not erase its terror. Instead, it deepened it. For what is more frightening than a weapon we cannot see, a curse we cannot trace, a book that may be resting at this very moment in some forgotten chest, waiting for curious hands? The true horror of the poisoned book was not merely in the deaths it caused, but in the silence of its absence. Because when something disappears, it does not mean it is gone. It means it is waiting. Centuries passed and the world changed. Kingdoms rose and fell, libraries burned, and new sciences emerged to replace old superstitions. The book's legend faded into the realm of rumor, a story told in hushed tones to frighten apprentices or to explain mysterious deaths that physicians could not. But the dead pages were not gone. They were waiting. It began, as many rediscoveries do, with curiosity. In the 19th century, collectors scoured monasteries, castles, and ruined estates, searching for rare manuscripts to fill their libraries. Among the piles of forgotten texts, worm-eaten Bibles, weathered chronicles, illuminated manuscripts with flaking gold. There surfaced a book whose reputation was older than the nations themselves. Its binding was cracked, its leather brittle, yet the words within gleamed unnaturally bright, as if preserved by something beyond time. At first, it was treated as a relic of beauty. Scholars opened it with gloved hands, marveling at the pigment that still glowed, the ink that had not faded. But soon the whispers returned. Assistants who handled it developed rashes that no salve could soothe. One archivist, bold enough to spend hours transcribing its lines, fell suddenly ill. His skin yellowing, his breath rattling in his chest until it ceased altogether. Doctors wrote it off as infection. Others, remembering the old stories, shivered. It was only when science advanced further that the truth emerged. Under microscopes, chemists examined flakes of its pigment. What they found confirmed centuries of fear: arsenic. A poison refined and embedded into the very ink, invisible, enduring, lethal in the smallest dose. The book had not been cursed by sorcery. It had been armed by human hands. The revelation was both horrifying and electrifying. Historians debated, was it intentional, a deliberate weapon, or merely the result of artisans using vibrant but deadly minerals in their pursuit of beauty? The distinction mattered little to the victims. The book had done its work quietly, efficiently across centuries, and still fascination persisted. Even after the truth was uncovered, scholars could not look away. The book was placed under glass, sealed from touch, a relic both feared and admired. People came to see it not just for its words, but for its shadow, for the death woven into its beauty. Like moths to flame, we cannot resist what threatens us most. The dead pages had returned, not as a weapon this time, but as a mirror, reflecting humanity's endless hunger for knowledge, even when that knowledge burns. What remains, then, is the question that lingers like smoke. Was the poisoned book a cruel accident, or a deliberate act of murder written in ink? The truth may never be certain, but its legacy stretches far beyond the fragile pages still locked in archives. Some historians argue that the poison was an unintended consequence, a byproduct of medieval artistry. The colors that dazzled the eyes came from substances miners ripped from the earth: arsenic, mercury, lead, all as deadly as they were beautiful. In this view, the book is not a weapon, but a tragic irony. Knowledge wrapped in death, beauty intertwined with rot. A reminder that the pursuit of brilliance often blinds us to danger. But others insist on darker intentions. Too precise, they say, too consistent. The victims fell not once, but again and again, across generations, across borders. A coincidence does not carry itself through centuries. No, the ink was poisoned on purpose, perhaps by a ruler who sought to silence his enemies with elegance instead of blood, perhaps by a secretive sect, determined to guard their knowledge from unworthy eyes, perhaps by one man so twisted in his genius that he sought to turn wisdom into execution. Regardless of its origin, the poisoned book became more than parchment. It became a symbol, a reminder that knowledge is never innocent. Every word written, every page turned, carries weight, and sometimes it carries a price. The deaths it claimed are not only stories of pain, they are testimonies to humanity's unquenchable thirst to know more, even when the cost is unbearable. Today, the book survives, locked behind protective glass, its pages untouched by human hands. Scholars lean close but never breathe its air. Tourists marvel at the quiet menace it radiates, a relic of an age when death could be bound between covers. It no longer kills, yet it still unsettles. For even sealed away, it whispers a question to every soul who gazes upon it. Would you risk touching me? Would you risk opening me, knowing what I am? The legacy of the murderous text is not only in the bodies it left behind, but in the mirror it holds up to us. For we are still the same as those who perished centuries ago, drawn to forbidden knowledge, willing to risk suffering for the sake of discovery. That is why the poisoned book endures, not because of the deaths it caused, but because of the truth it reveals about us. We are creatures who reach for the flame, even knowing it will burn. And sometimes, That flame is bound in leather, pressed in ink, waiting quietly on a shelf.